Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
Hello, I'm Jessica Knight, and today I interview a very special guest, Gwen Walsh. Gwen is a tarot reader, an intuitive, and a sensuality coach. Working with Gwen throughout my emotionally abusive relationship and a lot of other situations allowed me to look at my experience almost as a viewer, as if I could take a step out of my life, see what was happening, see what was coming up in the cards, and allow myself a different perspective. I've gone to her to talk about my business, relationships, my daughter, and ex-partnerships. Our conversation today will talk a bit about emotional abuse and a lot about tarot. And if you have any questions or if you want to reach out to Gwen, all of her information will be in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed the interview.
Hello.
Gwen, we met because one of my friends told me that I had to talk to you because you were a love witch and that I was going through a breakup that was really, really challenging. And she was like, you need to talk to this woman. And I just booked it and I had no idea who you were. And I mean, obviously our journey has continued and we'll talk about that like more today, but can you tell me a little bit about how you became a love witch, but also where you are now? Because I was on your website right before and it said that like you, I think this is new, but you framed yourself as a sensuality coach, which I loved, but I would like to hear more about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess how I became a love witch, if you will,
Yes.
is so I've worn a lot of hats in my life, but the most special ones were being a sex educator and a tarot reader, which are two things that I still am. And so that's kind of how the Love Witch name came to be, because it was a merging of those two things that seemed kind of disparate, but to me were very much interconnected in the sense of holding emotional space for people, creating a safer space for people, and helping people to get in touch with their intimate selves, whether that's emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, whatever. So I started, to go way back, I was raised Roman Catholic. And so there was not a lot of talk, not any talk about sexuality or about really,
too, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Or about really like getting to know yourself.
Yeah.
My parents did a good job raising me as a self-aware person. But when I went to Catholic school, like there was maybe one health class on sex and it was like saved for right at the end. And basically the teacher said, don't have it. And that was the lesson. That was my sex ed class. And so I went into the world as an adolescent and a young adult, not knowing anything and knowing how terrible that felt, thinking like God hates me or whatever. And I was like, there must be a better way. And so when I was in college, my third year of college, I finally settled on a major and it was women's studies. And so that was a really nice interdisciplinary way to learn about history, communications, bodily autonomy and sovereignty, all of these different things. And I got an internship at Planned Parenthood and then continued as a volunteer leader. And then I got a job as a sex educator at a local sexuality boutique that was very education forward. And so all of those things merging together, it really gave me the opportunity to learn for myself and to help other people and to see the difference in their countenance, in their energy, in the way they communicate when they enter a space feeling nervous and uneducated about their intimate selves. And once they receive that education and they feel physically and emotionally safer, how that changes them as a person, both in their sex lives and in their lives in general. And so doing that and also being a tarot reader and taking professional clients at the studio that I was at when I first started reading professionally, like the similarities in the sense of having that safe space, allowing people to get in touch with their emotions and these parts of themselves that wider society was kind of like, no, we don't touch that. We don't go there. And giving them a space to go there was just so amazing, like seeing the change that it could create in them and how it gave them a greater sense of self-efficacy and autonomy. And so that is kind of how the Love Witch thing was born. And it actually started out as a blog. I started a blog called the Love Witch blog.
Okay.
And it was just little blog posts about different things. Like I would write about a sex toy, an astrological transit, a Sabbath, whatever. And then it kind of grew into, I could really make something out of this. I could really reach a lot of people with this. And so that's how it grew into my business and tarot readings and courses and all this stuff. So I do a lot of different things. I have a lot of kind of different job titles for myself. But I would definitely say that the Love Witch kind of idea of merging the sexuality, spirituality, psychology, self-intimacy, emotional intimacy, all of that kind of encapsulates the general idea.
Yeah. And so when I found you and I went to your website, your website has changed too since a year ago or 9 months ago. And so one of the things I realized though is that typically when people like are a sex coach or something, sometimes that like because of my own comfort with my own sexuality, sometimes I get like turned off, but I wasn't turned off from you. Like it was very inviting. And I remember like reading through it and I actually sent it to a client that was like wanting to explore more of her sexuality. And I was like, there's a lot here around, like, I'm not used to feeling comfortable from somebody, but it was like your energy made me comfortable. And when you were just talking right now about like reading somebody's energy and like inviting some of these things in and allowing them to feel confident, like that's actually what I wrote down around like your tarot readings and how I was feeling about them. Because when I came to you with my relationship stuff, it was a 30-minute love reading was kind of like the first thing. And I was going through a breakup. And I remember the cards saying like soulmate, like they were like, I think it was soulmate. There was another connection card. I forgot what it was though. It might've been lovers, a card around there. But that wasn't the message. The message wasn't this is your soulmate. The message was more so like, take the definition of soulmate as you will. And I followed Elizabeth Gilbert's definition, which is basically like, it's here to rock you and open you up. And so when you are reading for somebody, if they are going through a breakup, I know that when you're interpreting the cards that like, I can tell that there's like a lot going on for you. How do you know kind of like where to go with it? Because I feel like when you read in the same way that I'm sure that you helped, like the way you just described it, it was like, this offers a new perspective to somebody. And like, that's exactly what this does for me is it's like, takes me out of myself for a second and gives me another perspective. So I guess if we like use like me as the example for that, like reading, how do you know, or how are you like sensing like, this isn't like stay in this relationship, but this is something else?
Yeah. So it's a mix of what I receive psychically and intuitively, as well as kind of aligning or how that merges with my own ethics. And to be clear, I am not a licensed therapist yet, getting there.
Yeah.
But I'm not yet. But to give people an idea of how I operate, my set of ethics is much closer and much more in alignment with a therapist than what somebody might think of as a fortune teller or something like that.
Yeah.
So like my job is to help people and to facilitate the space for people to make their own decisions as opposed to telling people what to do. And so especially with things like love and relationships, that's why I love doing love readings so much, because they are so emotionally heavy and weighted. Like there's a lot of this decision really matters. This decision will have a big part in deciding the trajectory of my life. And we can't take that lightly, especially if it's somebody that someone has been with for a long time. Like it's very sensitive subject matter. So the way that I approach readings like that is being solutions-based and very much autonomy forward for whoever I'm reading for. So instead of me saying, oh, we got the Two of Cups reversed, and that means a breakup. So you're going to break up with this person no matter what. Like, I'm never going to say that to somebody. I might receive a certain card as like, look at it this way or consider it this way. And that is not telling you to do anything one way or the other, but it's asking, like you said, for the person to consider a different perspective and allow that perspective to be a part of what informs their decision. So if I do get, for example, the Two of Cups in a reading reversed, which is traditionally seen as the breakup card, which I have gotten in readings for clients before, I am not going to say, oh, this is the breakup card, and that means you're breaking up with this person and it's fated and you can't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. What I will say is that when we look at the Two of Cups reversed, it indicates an inequality in the relationship. So acknowledging that there's most likely an inequality in the relationship, what do you as the client want to do about that? And what does your partner want to do about it? Because I do really believe that if there is an issue in the relationship, even if it's a really difficult one to overcome, like infidelity or substance use or something like that, if both partners are willing to put in the time, energy, and effort to work on that, whatever that means, whether that's communication, counseling, whatever, then I do believe that they can work through it and get through it if they are really dedicated to it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but that's a choice that people have to make. And then other times the person just feels like, well, I could work on this, but I really feel like the relationship is done. And so it puts the choice in the people's hands instead of me saying, oh, this is what's fated to happen and you can't do anything about it. So it kind of outlines where things are going, where things are at, so that people can make informed decisions based on, okay, I acknowledge that there's an inequality here, or I acknowledge that one person's putting in way more effort than the other person. What do I want to do about that?
Yeah.
So, and it's also like, and I feel like we've talked about this before too, this issue of I'm not somebody's BFF telling them like, you should just stop texting that person. Like you should just break up with them, because that's not going to be helpful, because people need to, like we said, make their own decisions in their own time. And that personal timeline for someone could look like 1 day, 1 week, 1 year, 1 decade. And it's not my place to say, well, this is what I personally think you should do. It's my place to support someone in making a decision that feels good for them and that feels sustainable for them. And for some people, that might look like slowly growing apart from a person, because if they tried to do it all at once, it would just fail miserably and they would end up getting back together because those emotions are so heightened. And when you have someone tell you, oh, well, you should just stop talking to that person, that heightens those emotions again. And my job is not to sensationalize and heighten people's emotions. It's to calm those emotions and provide an objective perspective so that people can make decisions from a place of calm instead of from a place of high sympathetic nervous system response.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, as you were talking, I actually wrote down, because you reminded me of the no contact thing. And you were actually the only person in my life when I was leaving the emotionally abusive relationship that I wasn't ready to block. And like, that was the only advice I got from anybody, is just cut it off. And it's like, you're asking me to kind of cut off my hand. Like like we're intertwined in various ways and I just wasn't ready. And it is said that like it usually takes like 7 tries to leave an emotionally abusive relationship. And I don't know what try number that was, but it was in the middle somewhere, probably number 4 or 5. And so I remember when you said, like, I'm not telling you to cut off contact. And I even had like an event with this person like coming up, and you're like, I'm not telling you like to go. Like maybe you do need, like, if you feel like you need to. And I felt like I did. And I remember I did it, and it actually was really helpful. When I was ready to cut off contact, it felt like this is the time. Like now I'm ready, because I've like worked through. And when I was ready, it was complete. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to try and fail and try and fail. It was like, I'm working through this the way that I know how to. And when I get to this place, I'm going to feel like at least okay with that decision. And I feel like that's how I work with people, as like a coach too, of just, I can't tell you the timeline. I could tell you the things and give you some offerings, but you best. I think that's what tarot has really been in my life. And so you're right. Like, I do think that you approach it with like a therapy mindset. And I feel that, like, I came to you a few weeks ago when I was like super activated, and like the words that stuck out to me that you used were like protection and safety. those really helped me. When I walked away from that, that's what I was thinking, protection and safety. And so when you have someone that's in like a really tough or very emotional situation, if they are very activated, I know you're going to listen to the cards, but I'm curious like what you lean into in terms of like helping them like calm it down, like get out of the trauma responses, fight, flight, fawn, freeze.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to preface this, of course, every circumstance is different. And so if it was a case where somebody felt that they were in immediate physical danger, then of course that would be different than somebody who it's like, oh, well, we just keep texting and it's probably not the best. So of course, every situation is different and is going to warrant a different response. But if it is something where someone is not in immediate physical danger, then the way that I frame it is in the sense of tarot being this either spiritual or secular psychological exercise, depending on what feels good for the individual, of them coming back to themselves and building the kind of emotional skill set to make decisions for themselves. Because I believe that if we approach tarot from this perspective of, I don't know anything and I'm getting a tarot reading so that it can tell me what to do, then we're not growing as individuals. Like if I was just telling my clients like, okay, this is the step-by-step of what you need to do, and then come back to me next time you need to make a decision, that's not going to help them to grow as people. And so my philosophy is kind of like teach someone to fish, feed them for a lifetime.
They'll also probably feel like they're disappointing you if they don't follow, like, oh, Gwen said this, I can't book another reading. This was helpful, but I didn't do what she said. It's like, it's always an invitation, I feel like, when you offer something, when you offer what the cards are saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is a lot, especially for those of us living in America, we're both in America right now. There's a lot of shame in our culture about, am I doing things right? Am I being successful? Am I being my best self? All of this stuff. And tarot is a very emotionally intimate and sensitive space. And so when we approach it from this space of, I am the tarot reader and I'm telling you, the little person, what to do because you can't make decisions for yourself, that's not an ethical business dynamic. It's not an ethical healing dynamic. It's not an ethical anything dynamic. And so the way that I like to approach it is tarot is a way for me to bring my expertise and the psychic and intuitive abilities that I do have, as well as the emotional, psychological kind of skill sets that I do have to offer, and merging it with the client's skill sets and choice and autonomy and how well they know themselves and their expertise. And we're merging it with this tool for reflecting on these different areas of life so that they can make decisions that are good for them. And of course, I help in that process. I support, I facilitate, and I will sometimes give like step by step, like I recommend you read this book or check out this framework or this psychological theory. But the idea is to ultimately give someone a skill set or kind of a tool to put in their toolbox to help them as they go forward, so that a reading is not just a reading. It's kind of like a gift that keeps on giving, if you will, because people can go back to that and say, oh, okay, yeah, I should think about things like this. And maybe we got the soulmate card for this other situation. And now that I'm in this new relationship, like thinking about things in that way, do I feel differently? Does it feel like a repetition of the same dynamic? And so it's not just a snapshot of that one time in someone's life. It's like something that they can go back to and think about things in that same way. And if/as they have things that they want to work on further, then they can book again and we can continue moving forward in their lives. And so I really want it to be this kind of like the opposite of codependency, like helping someone to help themselves, if that makes sense. And in terms of when somebody comes to me really activated, again, I'm not going to fix someone's trauma in a 30 or 60-minute reading. You just cannot, nobody can do that. And that's okay. But what we can do is provide someone, again, with this opportunity to be in a safer space and to come back to themselves. And even if they need to have the reading now and it doesn't really hit, but it's recorded so they can go back to it later when they are a little bit more emotionally distant. And then it can be helpful to them then, taking it however they want to take it, and being in this space where I'm not going to judge someone if they're like, oh yeah, I went back to my toxic ex. I'm not going to judge you. Or if they're like, oh yeah, we ended up having sex or whatever. It is not my place to judge. And I just do not have a judgment. Like, that's literally my job, is to not judge people. And so I would hope that for folks to have that safer space where they can say what they feel and say their truth and go from there, instead of pretending like life's good and okay and kind of sidestepping the issue and being like, oh, asking for a friend, because I feel like a lot of life is like that. We don't want to tell our besties if we ended up texting our ex again. We don't want to tell our parents if we're going off with that guy that they don't like. And so tarot can be this objective kind of blank slate, if you will, of, okay, this is where I'm at. What do I need to think about? What do I need to consider? How can I make decisions myself in order to move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with toxic relationships, emotional abuse, nothing's linear. We actually did a reading on like my emotional abuse coaching. I remember that's actually was the message, was that I was trying to make it this pattern, and like the cards were saying, and you were saying, like, it's saying like, be messy, because like it is messy. And so is like, I think breakups, and like healing from breakup. I remember something like I felt very sexually comfortable with my toxic, emotionally abusive ex. And I really loved that part of myself. Through the cards and working together, I started to see that the sexuality was actually within me and the comfort was within me. And when we had sex the last time, I remember it not feeling good and like being like, I hate this. Like, why am I doing this? And I never thought I would have that feeling, but having the feeling and having it like feel like affirmed was like, it was almost like, okay, this ran its course. Or like I did the work I needed to do on me in the meantime. And now I know that this is within me and it's not within the dynamic. But you also said something else about, this is not the way you phrase it, but this is what I took from it, is like, if the cards are not really necessarily giving you what you want them to at times, or like if there's a message that you don't really understand, you can go back and you can listen, you can ask yourself, what does it mean at another time? And so if someone listening to this does book with you, what I want them to know is that there have been plenty of times where like the message wasn't exactly what I wanted. It wasn't like, you're going to get the exact apology, on this date, but there was enough in the cards that I felt like I could trust it. I remember specifically getting, for me, like the card that represented me was the star. And the card that represented my toxic ex was the 5 of Pentacles. And that's a very dark card. And I remember feeling like every time I go into this space, I sort of enter that. I enter like that hunched over, not even looking up. Like that was like, I think what was coming up is like, this person's not even looking in the world. And when I'm in that space, I don't do that. And the star is like a beautiful card that has a lot of different meanings and it's flowy. And that was like who I lost, or that part of me is what I lost when I was in the dynamic. And I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I probably have like 25 other of those examples of just like, even like with the page growing to the king for like other dynamics. And that has been super helpful too, to just, I always come back to the idea of, even if it's not what I want to hear, there's so much in there that is so resonant that it's like, I can pause and listen to this, again. And I do record ours and I've listened to them more than once. Like our year reading, I continue to listen to. And I just like, I always hear something I didn't hear in the moment. And I think a lot of the times, like I'm hearing it when I need to hear it.
Exactly. And that's the thing is, again, putting the power, I sound like a revolutionary, putting the power in the hands of the people. But really putting the power in the client's hands, the recipient's hands. I think a lot of people have a fixation on predetermination and destiny. I mean, that's literally what our country was founded on. And so we have that kind of ancestral background of Salem witch trials, Calvinism. When you were born, like this was destined for you and you can't change it. And so I think this kind of new way of thinking that I hope more people take on as time goes on is that we can change things. We have the autonomy and we're at a place at least in this country, in our development, to be able to change things depending on our unique circumstances, of course. And so when you get a card, for example, in a tarot reading that you don't like, and I'm teaching a tarot course right now. And so I just talked with my tarot students about this yesterday. When you get a tarot card that you don't like, instead of being like, oh, well, I guess I'm fucked, thinking instead, why don't I like this? What about this do I not like? Is it a card that I've been taught not to like? Is it a card that represents a change that I need to make that I'm resisting? And being compassionate with ourselves, because again, like we talked about, having something or someone else tell you what changes you need to make, even if you made that change, but you weren't, again, going back to sex ed, if you're not totally consenting to making that change, it's not going to stick. And so taking the time and energy to tune into yourself of like, why don't I want to leave this relationship? Or why do I not like the idea of being independent or whatever? Taking the time to think about that and really making it personal to you. And again, that doesn't mean that you are compelled to action before you feel ready. But it does indicate that there, again, is an invitation or an encouragement towards that reflection that could help you to move forward in your own personal timeline in a way that feels good for you. I know I've gotten the death card many a time when it's represented a breakup that I needed to initiate. And I would resist it. And I just wasn't ready. I couldn't do it. In one case for me, it literally took 10 years.
Yeah.
And so I think we talked about this too, where I would say to you, I literally took 10 years to end things with a certain person. And so even if I wanted to judge, I am in no place to judge. And so I think coming from that mutual understanding can really help of like, we're all just doing our best in the world. And as long as we take our own time and fully consent to whatever is going on as much as we can, that's going to create the lasting change.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm telling someone to do something and they do it just because I told them to, that's not really empowerment for them. In some cases, again, if it's immediate physical danger, then there is action that has to be taken. But if it is not that way, then it is important to take one's own time and to, again, really have that power within oneself to choose when and how it goes. And I remember just this past weekend, I did a reading for myself. I was on a retreat for my matron deity, and she is a goddess of prophecy, amongst other things. And so I pulled a prophecy card, and it was a card that I didn't like. And instead of being like, oh no, I'm destined to a life of ruin, I was like, okay, if I don't like this card, what am I going to do about it? If I don't like the prophecy that is being given to me right now, then that's an invitation for me to take action to change that. So in my case, the prophecy was burnout. It was the Knight of Wands reversed. And so I said to myself, okay, how am I going to ensure that I don't burn myself out? And so I've been taking more time to not be on Instagram so much, not be checking my email 5,000 times a day, taking more time to be at peace with myself in meditation, all of these things. And that's the thing is like, there's nothing that's predetermined that we can't control for the most part. It is when we get those things or when we get cards that we don't like, it's important to think like, why don't I like this? And how can I be self-compassionate and move forward, take action in a way that helps me to turn it into a situation that I do like, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I actually did a reading the other day for myself on a situation that I'm in with my ex-husband, and the Tower card was one of the cards that came up. And like, because the Tower can look like in my brain, it could be interpreted as like me being thrown out of the tower, or it could be like a change, like a spark and change. It just reminds me too, like I had a client, I still work with this client, but I had a client who was getting really frustrated with the Wheel of Fortune card, and when you said like, is it a card that represents change that I'm resisting? It was like, that kind of was the message. It was like, sometimes they just keep appearing and you have to ask yourself, if it keeps coming up, why am I just trying to like not gaslight myself out of it? Like, nope, don't have to do this. Like, don't, and it's like, just look at it. Just ask the question. I think you do invite that in your session. I really feel like you can tell if someone is like, but I think you invite like what is the deeper meaning here? We don't have to really do anything about it, but like, let's acknowledge it.
Exactly.
Is there a
And
card?
especially with a card like the Tower, if we think of it, and this is why I love really diving deep with tarot, if we look at the architecture of the Tower, it's a medieval jail. And so we might have talked about this before, we might have not, but like the idea of if it's a prison building that's burning down, is that really so bad?
Yeah.
And so we see the chaos of the situation and we don't like it because as human beings, we don't like chaos. And this goes into like understanding these psychological concepts that can really validate our experience and help us to be kinder to ourselves and make real substantive change. If we look at things like attachment theory, we don't like breaking up with people, no matter what type of person it is, even if it's a toxic, shitty person, because a breakup threatens our attachment system. Because when we were cave people, if we were not attached to someone, we were more likely to die. And so our little reptilian brain thinks, oh, if I break up with this person, I may die. That's literally what's going on for a lot of us. And so understanding that and saying, okay, maybe I'm not resisting the breakup because this is the person I'm meant to be with for my entire life. Maybe I'm resisting the breakup because my little reptilian brain is telling me I may die. And of course, most of us don't want to die.
Yeah.
And so understanding that, understanding how those physiological responses work and appreciating them for alerting us to danger, because we do need those alerts to danger. And we also have the ability to look at things kind of a second time beyond the initial reaction and say, okay, I appreciate that my body is trying to alert me to danger. And my more modern brain says, no, I will not actually die if I break up with this person. So I can make a more informed decision that's not just from my little cave person brain. And so looking at the Tower, we see chaos, and most people don't love the idea of chaos. And so we resist the Tower. But if it's a jail that's burning down and thus setting us free, then that actually is a quote unquote good situation. It might be uncomfortable and unfamiliar, especially if we are used to the jail. It's kind of like the rescue dog that you open the door to its cage and it doesn't want to come out because it's afraid of the change. And so thinking of all of those things and kind of reframing it in a more constructive way can really help us to see past the initial perception of, oh, that's a bad card. I need to get away from it.
Yeah. Well, because even in a toxic relationship, it can feel like that. It could feel like the breakup is going to kill me, or if I'm never going to find somebody again. It's like the Tower, what that represents to me is like an ending of a system, like, or ending of an idea, which I think a lot of us resist the change, like, and we resist what that will look like. And I think because like, if that's all we know and that's all we are thinking, we're thinking like, this is going to suck. Or like I'm just going to have to do this again, when it's like, well, if there's like, if the reading is sort of saying like, this is an end of this idea, or like this idea of love or this idea of attachment, it can be so powerful. And I think that's what the cards like really do offer. And what I also like, I like that you've never made a reversed card. Somebody listening to this may not know what like a reversal actually means, but you've never framed a reversal as a negative or like a shadow. I think it invited me to not see them that way too.
Yeah.
Can you explain quick like what a reversal is?
Yeah. So a reversed card is when a card comes up looking upside down instead of right side up. And some readers read reversals and some don't. There are different reasons for reading them or not. I personally do because I feel like they add more nuance to a card. And there's also, unfortunately, a lot of traditional tarot teachers and the tarot websites that will come up first when you Google the meaning of a card will often paint reversals in a very negative and often misogynistic light. So like the Queen of Pentacles reversed, for example, if you look on like a popular tarot website for what does the Queen of Pentacles reversed mean, it will say things like selfish and envious and catty and petty and all of these really awful misogynist things. And same for many other cards. When in reality, this is why I think the psychic aspect of tarot is so important, which is why that's such a big part of how I teach tarot, because if we pull a bunch of cards or even one card and we feel good about it, and then we flip it over and it's, say, the Queen of Pentacles reversed, then we're like, oh, I guess my intuition was wrong. I guess this is actually a bad card. I guess I'm actually a selfish and petty person when I thought I was just taking more time for myself. And that, again, engenders this feeling of, oh, it's that big authority over there that knows everything and I know nothing. Like I'm always the one that's wrong, which in my opinion is not the way that we should be approaching things, especially when it comes to intuition. I think it's really important to listen to ourselves. And yes, we can take from the traditional teachings, but I think it's a merging of the two, not a hierarchy of one being better than the other. So that's kind of what reversals are. And so how I read reversals is I will kind of tune into how I feel about them before I even flip them over and see that they're reversed. So if we do get a card that feels like, say, an internalization or like a personalization and it comes up reversed, I will see that card as more of internal work or work that you're kind of doing on the inside instead of externally putting something out there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And we've had the situation before where the right side up was more resonant for the situation. And I don't know, your presence is very trusting. So I was like trusting that that was the message that I was getting. I know we're almost at time. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, this will be like last question, and then was around if there's a card that's your favorite. But I actually reframed that question as we were talking. And like, I would rather ask, knowing that you went through a 10-year relationship, which you told me the day our first session was really helpful for me because I was like, this isn't this perfect love witch that has all the answers. It's like, no, she struggles too. And I think like that's actually what really helps me in helping clients is that like I am somebody who I've gone through numerous tough relationships. I've been married. Like I have reworked my attachment style a lot. I'm still reworking it and gets me to understand in a different way. And so I was curious if there was a card that helped you heal through that relationship or like a pairing of cards that either kept showing up or a message that it kept offering.
Oh, that's tough. Well, I did at one point for that relationship, I did a reading kind of for closure. And this is what I like to do a lot with myself for other clients, because like closure only really comes from ourselves when we decide it. Like we could get coffee and talk 8 million times with our ex and still decide that we don't have closure. So that's what I did. And a part of that reading was like, what is the lesson here? And also like, what can I take comfort in? And I think that having that balance of not using tarot as like finding out how we need to fix ourselves all the time is really important, because if we're in a state of constant, like, I need to change, I need to fix myself, I need to get better, that's not fair to us. That's like a constant high SNS state of, oh, I better fix myself, I better up level and get to my next level or whatever. And so utilizing what can I take comfort in? What am I doing well at? Where am I not fucking up? Where do I not need to fix myself? Was really helpful. I would say that, the cards that I remember from that reading, I mean, in general, it's usually been the death card, which is my like kick in the butt to initiate breakups. I probably got that card for this person at one point. And I resist it a lot because I always thought it's like, oh, a death, something dying. But in reality, the way that I see the death card now is being honest with myself. Like if I or anyone were on their deathbed, what would they say about this relationship? Would they be glad that they continued it or not? And that's really how I see death, is like being honest with ourselves, getting to the bones of the situation. And the other cards that I got that I remember most with that reading are the Eight of Swords and the Queen of Pentacles. And the Eight of Swords was one of the last cards that I got, which was really helpful in the sense of the Eight of Swords is kind of this self-binding and this orientation toward, for lack of a better way of saying it, a scarcity mindset. Because the way that the Eight of Swords is illustrated in the traditional Rider-Waite deck is it's somebody who is blindfolded and bound and who is standing in a circle of swords in this kind of barren, sort of deserty environment. And behind them is this big castle. And so they are blinded, so they can't see anything. And even if they unblindfolded themselves and they would look out, all they would see is a desert. And they'd be like, well, what was the point of unblinding myself? I'm just in a desert. But if they take the effort to turn around, which we see also in the Five of Cups, the need to turn around to reorient oneself emotionally, mentally, they would see that castle. And in the Five of Cups, if the person turned around, they would see the two cups representing emotional opportunities waiting for them. And that's kind of on the same thread as the Queen of Pentacles for me. The Queen of Pentacles in that reading was like, who am I? What card represents me? And that's what I got. And so it really spoke to me as there is nothing intrinsically wrong with me. There is nothing that I'm lacking that made this relationship not work out. And it also spoke, especially because I am someone who has an anxious attachment style or partially anxious attachment style to some extent. So seeing that and going back to that abundance mindset of, again, people throw around the word abundance pretty loosely, but in this sense, meaning that this is not the one partner that will ever make me happy. This is not my one chance at love. This is someone who, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, okay, whatever. And there are so many other potential people that can make me happy. And that's kind of the crux of the issue with anxious attachment people, is that we feel like if it's not this one person, then I will never find love again. Mm-hmm. You know, if it doesn't work out with this one person, I will be alone forever and I may die because of that.
And because I tried so hard with this one person and it didn't work out, I'm definitely going to die. Yeah,
exactly. And so reframing that as actually, I am the Queen of Pentacles, the royalty, the self-mastery of Pentacles, which is safety and groundedness and stability and abundance of safety in that way. And so reframing it in that sense was like, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. It takes two, or however the song goes.
Yeah.
And so if this other person is not in a place of wanting to be in this relationship with me for whatever reason, then that's okay. I can simply move forward and be my Queen of Pentacles self. And at some point, I will attract a person because there are so many people who could potentially be a fitting partner for me. And so that really, really helped of reframing it not as a loss, but as a, okay, with this one person out of the billions out there, it happened to not work out. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. Gwen, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
About how people can find you. I saw that you have a June workshop coming up, but I also like to talk very quickly about your readings.
Yeah, sure. So I am mostly on Instagram. I'm at Gwen Walsh, just my name. And my website is gwenwalsh.com, same thing. And I do have for June, I have a group summer solstice tarot reading. So for people who either it's more accessible to do the group style or they just love the idea and the environment of a group reading, that is there. And that link is in my website or on my Instagram bio. Of course, my books are open for one-on-one readings. And so you can find the link to that either on my Instagram page or my website as well. And I do have a group coaching program coming up soon for Leo season in 2022. So that's going to run all the way through Leo season, and it's going to be centered on confidence and power and kind of maintaining that personal set of ethics, both in oneself and as a community member. So really excited for all of that stuff coming up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll put all your links in the show notes too, so that people can easily just click on them.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.